All right. Good morning, Maheji. How are you guys doing? Everybody good? Everybody got their food? Okay, wonderful. I'm Katie Kali'ia'a. I'm a third year in ethnic studies here at UC Berkeley, a doctoral student. And before we begin with our panel, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today. All the way on this side in the blue is Sherry Hendorf, our professor here in Native American Studies. Sherry is Yupik from Alaska. Professor Sherry Hendorf is one of UC Berkeley's very own NAS faculty, and you may be familiar with her work. Some of her books include Going Native and Mapping the Americas. Professor Hendorf's research is aptly relevant for today's panel, with a focus on interdisciplinary Native American studies, contemporary literature, visual culture, and gender. We are so happy to have her here today, so please help me in welcoming Professor Sherry Hendorf.
Is the mic working? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Katie. Whenever people ask me how I like teaching at Berkeley, the thing that I always say in all honesty is that our students are amazing and they make it a great pleasure. So it's wonderful to work with Katie and all of our other students who are here. It is really a pleasure and an honor to be able to introduce these three panelists, each of whom is doing very inspiring work. But before I get to the introductions, I just want to say a few words about the importance of representation in Native American contexts to kind of frame our discussion. Then I'll move on to the introductions, and then I will kick off our discussion with a question, and then we'll open it to the floor. Why does representation matter? How do images of Native people reflect on the society that produces them? And how have they shaped our lives in the past and in the present? What does it mean when Native peoples represent themselves? Questions about how Native people are represented, by whom, and for what purposes have long generated heated debates. Today, as controversies over Indian mascots rage nationally, on our own campus, debates about who should possess Native cultural materials and human remains relate not only to ownership, but also to who holds the power to define Indianness itself. The intensity of these conflicts suggests the high political stakes of representation. Indeed, throughout history, representation has played a crucial role in the colonization of Native communities and the appropriation of their lands. The notion of Indian savagery transformed brutal conquest into just war, while the sexualization of Native women signified that Native lands, along with women's bodies, were available for the taking. Representation connects to political authority, so the idea that Native people were incapable of representing themselves suggested their inability to govern themselves. Images that placed Indians always in the past rendered them invisible in the present, and thus undercut their claims to land and political autonomy. Equally importantly, representation has shaped how we as Native people have seen ourselves, how we have understood our inherent value in humanity, our places in the world, and our limits and capabilities, sometimes with tragic consequences. So it is that when Native people dare to represent themselves, it is an act of social power, an assertion of authority, a protest against silence with dramatic implications. Redefining indigeneity means redefining the histories and identities of colonial nation states. What does it mean for the United States, for example, if we understand colonization as genocide rather than as just war? It also means redefining the social places of Native people in the present and affirming their claims to autonomy and territory. Self-representation, though, comes with serious challenges. The theorist Stuart Hall once famously described the terrain of culture as a battlefield. Nowhere is that truer than in Native America. Representing ourselves entails confronting ubiquitous stereotypes that diminish and erase Native people. It also means coming to terms with the deep popular investment in these images and in historical amnesia. Our three panelists have taken up these challenges in different ways. Dr. Adrienne Keene, to my right, holds an EDD in Culture, Communication, and Education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and she is now a postdoctoral fellow in Native American Studies at Brown University. Her dissertation is a portraiture study of Native American students and the challenges they confront in college. She is also the creator of the highly popular blog Native Appropriations, which focuses in part on popular representations. Matika Wilbur, who's at the end, is a photographer whose work has been exhibited extensively in high-profile venues nationally and internationally. She is a certified teacher at Tulalip Heritage High School in her home community. Currently, she is working on a documentary project that uses photography and oral history to represent the complex variety of all the federally recognized tribes in the United States. Migizi Penseneau has worked extensively as a writer and producer for Hollywood studios and independent production companies. He has won numerous awards and grants from ABC, Disney, the Institute of American Indian Arts, the Sundance Institute, and other organizations. His work with the Native sketch comedy group, the 1491s, has not only garnered national attention, but also involves work with tribal organizations, especially youth. Taken together, our panelists' work raises resonant questions about the enduring power of stereotypes, the ways in which they challenge dominant understandings of Native America, and what it means to represent Native people through the visual media of photography, film, and performance. But to kick off the discussion, I'd like to ask a different kind of question, a question about education. Education is important in all of your work, as theme, and Adrienne, I'm thinking about your dissertation. As vocation, so Matika, you are a teacher. As enabling condition, so Migizi, one of the important dimensions of the work of 1491s is it comes out of, it's created largely by Native college students. And as project, so all of your work aims to re-educate in some way. So why has education played such an important role in your work? And how would you describe the importance of education for Native communities in general?
Big question. Can you hear me okay? Are we okay? So I think for me, especially talking about my academic work, about my dissertation study and the students and communities I work with and community organizations, the whole goal of what I am looking at in those arenas is to sort of reframe Western higher education from this tool of assimilation into and cultural genocide into a tool of strength and of nation building and of capacity building in our communities. So I believe very strongly in the power of education to transform in any number of arenas. And the nice thing about having the balance of my dissertation work, which is very sort of formally situated in the field of education, and the blog, which is very informally situated, means that I have these two realms of spaces to enact education. So I can do it through my laid back and snarky blog posts, or I can do it through my academic articles and academic research. And I see a lot of power in both realms. So it's been amazing to me to see the change that can be created through both formal and informal education for our communities.
All right. For the work that we do in the 1491s, we get brought to college campuses a lot. None of the guys are actually very college educated generally. We, and I think Bobby didn't really finish high school. There are 5 of us in the group, and we have all sort of had different paths, and only one of us has completed a bachelor's, which is funny because Sterling Harjo and myself are going for our MFAs from IAIA without having, we bypassed getting a bachelor's. We just made movies, and then I had to have a bunch of people like call up and say, like, no, the work that he's done is resonant in importance. But it took some doing, but that's where we're at. And I think, but the work that we do has a tendency to resonate with sort of a particular group. We hit like high school students and college students particularly are sort of into our work. And they're the people, it's not the professors that bring us to college campuses. It's usually student groups or people that have heard of us, have seen us, and they're like, oh, we'd like that. So so that just happens to be, but it's also communities, it's different, you know, like sometimes we'll just end up in a community center or like, you know, a powwow or something. We'll just be there, and we will, what we like to do is, our big thing is about putting cameras, we don't teach people, at least not in a flat out academic, you know, sort of, you know, education kind of way, but we show people how to communicate visually with the camera, and or we'll just do it with them, and they'll talk about the things that they would like to see. And the work that comes out of college campuses it's work that comes through discussion and trying to express, and I think that age happens to be ripe when people are starting to want to express different things, or they're learning about different things, and they want to like sort of get those out. So we just happen to sort of catch that. So yeah. No, it's okay.
Oh. Hello, hi, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here with you folks, and I thank you for asking that question. It's a good question. Education is at the core of the work that I'm doing right now. I'm visiting all of the tribes in the United States, like she said, and this idea was born while I was teaching at the tribal school where I'm from the Tulalip tribe. And it started a few different ways. One of the things that I did with my students is when they would come into the classroom, I'd have them lay down. They loved that. And I would tell them that they were important and that they mattered. I would tell them that their lives were sacred, and I would tell them these positive affirmations. You're gonna be okay. Everything is gonna be okay. And while I was teaching, in the 5 years that I was teaching at a tribal school, I lost 19 students. And it was only about 170 kids in the school. And so, you know, if you grow up on the res, if you grow up in these communities, you know what I'm talking about. That struggle, that heartbreak, that's a real part of our identities. And how do we explain that to our children? And what then, if this is something that our kids are experiencing on a regular basis, to a point where we have these really high rates of suicide in our communities, and hopelessness is a real thing, then how do we counteract that? And that became this question that plagued me for a really long time while I was teaching. What can I do personally to change that? How do I instill hope in my kids? And Stephanie Freiberg, who was a professor at Stanford, she came back to teach at Heritage, and she. One day, it was like one of those really sad days. We had just come from a funeral. We'd been to like 2 that week. And she said, you know, if we can raise the self-esteem of our people, we can be a part of changing this. So for me, it was sort of like, I can stay here and keep teaching with my 19 students, or I can focus on a more national project and think about elevating the consciousness and the representations for our people on a larger scale. And so, what I aim to do is find positive representations of our people and share their story in a very humanist sort of way. And so I'm creating curriculums, you know, that can be distributed to on a national level. We've partnered with the University of Washington and several academic institutions. And we are working right now mostly on 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 9th grade curriculum packages. So what's really interesting is when I do a lot of this sharing, I go and I speak with a lot of elementary students, and I ask them, what does an Indian look like? You know, and the 3rd grader will always tell you, oh, they live in a teepee. And they want to talk to me about Pocahontas, and they're excited because that's what they know. So what I love about that idea is that our younger kids, they want to participate in sharing culture. So as an educator, it's my responsibility to create culture that is accessible to them and something that's honest and authentic, and I do that through storytelling. So for me, it's really personal. It's really at the core of my work, and I hate teaching. I don't even think I like kids. but I don't see any other way. You know, how do we facilitate change if not with our children? You know, what else matters? So, you know, like, it's, you know, I go through it. I really go through it. I like some people's kids. No. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah. You realize that's all I'm taking from this, is that you hate kids.
Or a blog post about it.
Well, thank you all, and I want to now open it up to the floor for discussion, but I also wanted to open the possibility if there are questions you would like to ask each other, feel free to jump in.
Oh, man.
Or questions you would like to answer yourself. But right now, we'll turn to the floor. Any questions? Comments?
I want to ask Adrienne about, sorry, do you guys have questions? Go ahead if you do. You got a good question, I'm ready.
If you have a bad question, I'm ready. I'll yell at you about it.
Yes, dear, you're coming.
No, she's just
No.
asking.
She's seen if you
So you have a
Okay,
question.
I have a question. I would like for Adrienne to talk about love in the time of blood quantum.
Come on. Okay. Those two posts that I put up, the Love in the Time of Blood Quantum post, I really was trying to raise a lot of questions, and I think especially among my Native friends, this is something we joke and talk about all the time, about like the quest to find like the Native person that you want to be with and the importance of that, and the implications for our future fictional babies and all these things. And we swap crazy stories about going on first dates and talking about where your kids are going to be enrolled when you like just met the person and stuff like that, because these conversations, they happen. And I think we talk about it a lot, but we don't always question the kind of structures that are in place and the systems of settler colonialism that were set up to create this, and blood quantum and all these things that are from outside of our communities, and the ways that they have very real implications on our everyday lives. And so those posts were interesting, because the first one I put it out there and I can't believe I'm talking about this with all of you. I did put it on the blog though. So I called like educated Indian men unicorns. I was like the unicorn that everyone was looking for, and they're kind of mystical. I'm gonna put my eye contact up here as I'm talking about this. And then it went sort of public. So, but the follow-up was then questioning that I put out there, because the conversation that happened in the comments on that post was really powerful. So people weighed in with their own stories and complicated my own narrative and pointed out the ways that I was blind to my own like heteronormativity and things that I wasn't even thinking about, the complications of our LGBT brothers and sisters in this and stuff too. So I think it's just been really interesting and opened the conversation a lot to like, what does it mean to be a Native person and trying to navigate these boundaries of dating and love when we have structures of colonialism in place that have real implications on our lives and our children and where they can enroll and what their identity is going to look like and things. So it's a weird thing to talk about and to put it out there and be really personal about it, but I think it's an important conversation that we need to be having.
Yeah. That aspect of things, that informed a thing that we do with our live, the 1491s do a live performance, and at the end of it, we do a love line sort of sketch, like these two like resi dudes like stumble onto a love line thing and they field fake questions from the audience, and we plant Bobby Wilson out in the crowd, and he asks these questions standing next to somebody going like, oh yeah, this guy wants to know, blah, blah, I think I might have an STD or something. But one of the questions is, like, he always finds somebody and says, I'm looking for the perfect Indian man. And our thing that we always do is like, oh, well, what does an Indian man look like then? Well, he has to, perfect Indian man, let's break it down. All right, he has to have at least a bachelor's, and he has to, have his driver's license, he has to pay his taxes, he has to have a job, he has to have long hair, he's got to be fit, he has to look like, Martin Sensmeyer and Bosh Collins had a baby, and then he's got to and so we go through this big list, and by the end of it, we're like, what makes me get really angry? We're like, well, what makes you so special? Christ, he's a unicorn, he's a mythological creature, no such thing as a perfect Indian man, and so it's something sort of based on that we always joke about, is that we're, but it tackles sort of the idea that there's no such thing as like a perfect Indian. Like these things are all stereotypes, or they feed into the joke actually is that in order to be sort of like this perfect person, what does that make you, what does that look like? Or especially what does it mean to be like a perfect Indian person? Because you have to have your shit together. Sorry, I curse a lot, so if you're offended, warning, sorry. But you have to have your stuff together. But at the same time, you have to be like super, you can't be like, urban community. You have to be like super resi, and you have to be like rugged. And and so we go off on these things and we talk about this weird sort of, I hate this word, but this, this dichotomy, this sort of binary of you have to be like the super educated Indian man, but at the same time, you can't have like doors. You have to have a blanket for your, window curtain, sheet for your window curtain, a blanket for your doors and stuff. And I'm like, what? That doesn't make you more Indian. The idea is that it doesn't make you more Indian. It makes you rugged, but it doesn't make you more Indian. There's nothing that defines, because it's tribal, the Pan-Indian thing. There's nothing that really defines Indian, and I think that conversation gets brought up in a really sort of disgusting and silly way by us when we do this sort of thing. So.
Love that. That's awesome.
Anyway.
Thanks, Matika.
You're welcome. Yeah.
What else? Who's got questions? Somebody has that
Some
question.
questions from the floor. So I should say, if you have questions, you can raise your hand, or you can write on these little cards, so whichever you feel more comfortable with. Okay, question for Matika. Have you considered expanding your project 562, which is on the federally recognized tribes, to include photographing unrecognized tribes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. No, I get that question a lot, When I conceptualized this project, I was thinking, I want to go visit all the tribes in the United States, and we were trying to come up with a topic for that. Like, what are we going to call this project? Are we going to call it We Are One People, or are we going to call it, indigenuity? Are we going to call it indigenous? What are we going to call it? And I was like sort of hitting a deadline. I was applying for this NIH grant, and I was like, I'm going to go to the federally recognized tribes 562. That's how many there were. That's what I did. Project 562. It was really that simple when I titled my project. That was about 5 years ago. And then I calculated like, okay, if I go to 2 tribes a week, how long is that going to take me? And I was 25 at the time, and I thought, okay, I need to be done by the time I'm 30 because I want babies, And so that's, for real, that's the truth. You heard it from me. That's how that went for me, but because I thought I have, I could probably travel for about 5 years. And it took me a couple of years to raise the money. And so, I'm 3 years in right now. I've been to half of the tribes in the United States that are federally recognized, and I've been traveling nonstop. I haven't gone home. I haven't had an apartment for years now. So I love the idea of visiting, all of the state-recognized tribes and the urban Indian communities, and going to Canada and Mexico and doing a World Indigenous Project. But I seriously need you all to help me, because I can only travel for so long. The road is really exhausting. So, and it's irked a lot of people. I get a lot of hate mail about that concept, because I myself am not, I'm not a stranger to this fight that we have going on about federal recognition and state recognition and what it means to be included or excluded, or how that affects the lives of our people. I grew up in a community in Swinomish where the Samish was bordering us, and they fought for federal recognition, and I have relatives from Duwamish, from Seattle, where they fought for federal recognition. So I've been I've been familiar with this conversation for a long time, and so it's been something that I've had to defend and discuss over and over and over again. And so my answer to that usually, especially when people ask me to go photograph all the tribes in Canada, is like, I think you should go photograph all the tribes in Canada. Because at some point I have to be able to go home and be around my relatives and be a part of my community. It's important to me, so.
But you did include Lumbee, right?
I did. I went to Lumbee, I went to Duwamish, I have photographed, so I just came from photographing the Black Indians in New Orleans that some people call the Mardi Gras Indians. It's not that I don't want to photograph people. I'll photograph almost anybody, but because I just find people so fascinating. But there's only so many days.
But I will add, just listening, I've been able to listen to a lot of Matika's interviews. With each of her photographs, there's a really long interview that goes along with it, and the participants get, we've both done it, we get to talk about ourselves and about our communities and our journeys and things, and to hear especially the Lumbee ones about just this struggle with state recognition and with non-federal recognition and things. I think it's really powerful to have those perspectives in the project too. So there is some representation from that perspective of being a non-federally recognized tribe. So I think that is important to highlight because Matika was underplaying that. But I think it's amazing.
I have a question for Adrienne. In the college system, how do you support Native youth who don't take Native studies or who choose fields like math or physics?
That's a great question. Those are the students who need even more support and love in a lot of ways because we're so underrepresented in STEM fields. And I think that's where these representations actually do come into play, and having older mentors and examples for students to be able to point to and see other Native scientists and other Native engineers and give them that support and guidance. Because I think often the conversations about Indians that occur on campuses are happening in the Native Studies department, are happening in the humanities and social sciences. So those students who are choosing these STEM fields can feel very isolated from those critical conversations about what it means to be a Native person. So it's a matter of the administration cultivating and supporting those students and their desires and needs as well, and not forgetting about them and letting the conversations just happen in Native Studies. Because when I talk about education as nation building, and we need, of course, not just the critical theorists and the teachers and whatever it is. We need the scientists, we need the engineers, we need the folks who can bring that knowledge into our communities as well, and represent in these fields where there are so few voices. I mean, last year there was one computer science PhD granted to a Native person, and it's my friend Corey, and that's crazy. That is, considering the world we live in and how much power is tied to programming and all of this, we need more Native people in those areas too. So I think it's really about creating those opportunities and supporting students through mentorship, because a lot of campuses don't know how to deal with those students. They don't understand the challenges that are unique to Native students. So letting other Native folks step in can be important.
Yeah, question here.
I was wondering if there was any discussions in Native academia about providing sovereign accreditation for their own education programs, and if something like that can be instituted across the country, among any country, federally, state, or unrecognized tribes?
I think the biggest place where that's happening is in the tribal college movement, and that is a place where I see huge potential for being able, because the biggest thing that a lot of Native students struggle with is making your degree from this fancy place relevant to your community and relevant to what you want to do. and being able to attend an institution that is designed and supported by your own community and is able to help you see the relevance and study things that are going to directly impact your community is huge. So I think that is a really important place to focus in the future too, about how we can assert our sovereignty through our own higher education programs and reframe a lot of these issues, because then students are home and they're able to access the education in a culturally grounded way.
Or, or not too. No, I mean, like, so here's the other thing. So I teach when I'm not, stripping naked and dancing on the interwebs for people with the 1491s. I teach visual communications, media, and film and television production classes at Salish Kootenai College in Montana. And one of the things that we struggle with constantly is the accreditation for that. On top of that, my girlfriend right now is in law school at the University of Montana. And so there are two different struggles that we're having in our house right now. One is that there is nothing in place. We talked about there needs to be more funding for like STEM and stuff, and that's great. But she is an Indian law student who has no real interest in going into Indian law. She wants to run Montana someday. And so she has an extensive background because her family had Supreme Court cases and stuff that had gone through. So she has a background in Indian law, but she doesn't want to practice Indian law. She wants to, go into possibly politics and stuff someday. And there's unless you're studying Indian law, there's not a lot of infrastructure for Indian lawyers. Or if you like, and then so for me too, the thing that I find with trying to get accreditation and funding with these film and television production classes is sort of the easiest way that I can sum it up, sort of layman's thing. You guys ever see the movie Austin Powers? Do you remember Dr. Evil talking to his son, and the kid's like, oh yeah, I think I want to, I really like animals. I think I want to be a vet. And he goes, what, an evil vet? And he's like, no, whatever, I'm thinking, and so he goes off, and he's like, well, maybe I could start a petting zoo. And he's like, an evil petting zoo? And so, like, when I try to tell students, and students aren't always interested in making, like, really depressing Native films, or even really uplifting Native films, they just want to make movies. And so when I try to explain this to people that are in charge of accreditation, or people that are in charge of money, especially trying to get grants, they're like, well, you know what? We really need a kid might just want to do a zombie movie or like a horror movie. And they're like, well, we really need a cultural component as part of this in order to grant you this. And so these kids are stuck with very little funding and very little resources to be able to make the kind of movies that they want, because they're like, a native zombie movie? A native horror movie? And these kids are like, no, I just want to, I want to scare the shit out of people. And so these things, if we're really working towards the humanization of Native Americans, if we're really working towards this sort of representation where we don't have to everything be like a native such and such, then we have to have the infrastructure behind that too. That it's just, and then that gets into another question of how you qualify what's a native person, blah, blah, blah. But in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of the education stuff like that, I feel like that would be a really powerful thing if there were organizations that weren't interested in just we're interested in people as natives and not just like the native content that comes out of it.
Yeah, snaps to that.
Yes.
I have a question in regards to, I guess, more along the lines of all three of you about your work. So you guys put yourselves out there, you're all very inspiring, and especially to this generation who have access to media. And I know that a lot of you definitely might get pushback from the native and non-native community members in regards to your work. I'm just curious on how you continue on to be here, continue to be inspiring, to do your work, and just kind of overcoming type of challenges, like what inspires you and so forth.
I'll go. Okay. I got this. I think for me, at the core of who I am as a Stahopes woman, I always return to that as my grounding force. So before I started the project, we had ceremony and we asked permission, and they said that the path will be laid for you. And it's been that way for me. everywhere that I've gone, I've met people that have helped and been open and kind and let me stay on their couch. And so for all of the negative feedback that I get equal amounts of love and kindness and encouragement. And there's times, this year was a really rough year for me. My first cousin committed suicide, and I had 5 kids that I taught pass away in Tulalip, where I'm from, and I just had a really rough year. I really missed home, and so for me, I always return to that prayer place. That's really an integral part of where I find strength, and it's there that I feel I get reminded that this work was this, and I was saying this to a close friend last night, like, this work that I'm doing it's not for me. It's not, it's for my people. It's for my theoretical babies, so that they can have a different experience, so that they don't have to push back in the way that I did, so that they don't experience racism and segregation, and so they don't always have to be the diplomat of every academic experience, or of every experience that they have when they introduce themselves as who they are. So hopefully they can have a little bit, it can be a little bit easier for them, the way that my grandparents made it easier for me. So it's not so much about whether I enjoy it all the time, but it's more for me about like the understanding and taking responsibility for who I was born to be. I was given a name, and I was given this responsibility when I was born, and so I think as Indigenous people, that's something that's a gift, that we get born knowing who we are, and either we accept that and we carry forward the work, or we go in a different direction. And so that gives me a tremendous amount of strength, knowing that I stand on the shoulders of giants. That makes me feel good. So does that help? You say
Mine is the way that I deal sort of with adversity is mine's just really, really personal. My mom was a tough lady, and worked doing social work in Minneapolis for a long time during the 70s and 80s, during all the AIM days and stuff. So, and when I was a kid, coming up in Minneapolis, it was pretty hard times, like in South Minneapolis, and as the sort of 80s kicked on, as I was a little guy, it was pretty rough, but so it was a weird sort of like mechanism that my mom just sort of didn't have time for, because she was working all the time and did whatever. And so her sort of mantra, can't believe I'm telling you all this, but her sort of mantra when I would try and, be sad or mad or something about whatever, if I tried to act like one of those kids in the grocery store that's throwing a fit, she would just pull me close and go, "Get happy, damn it." And I'd be like, "Oh." And that was it. Like she would just say like, "No, this is," so it's like within people to overcome adversity. It's within people to go up. And I had a really good traditional grounding outside of, that stuff with my mom. Like I have a place that I can call home forever. And we have our ceremonies, and we have our altar, and there are things that I can come back to. And a few of us in our group went to FedEx Field recently, and went to Washington Redskins tailgate just to see, and it was awful. It was god awful. It was just like terrifying to the max. Like it was one of the scariest, most horrible, vitriolic things I've ever put myself through, and and I'm watching like Shyamalan movies. Like that's how bad it was. It was worse than that. So we went through this like awful experience, and I get done with it, and I'm like, telling, my girlfriend about it. I'm just like, man, I don't know. It was just so intense, and you get to see firsthand this like wave of thousands of people yelling at you. And like, I'm like, this is in a very real physical scale. And this is a small scale physically for what we're, like, comparatively. What we're up against is this kind of ignorance and this kind of the stuff that we're trying to bring to light about Native culture and community and who we are as people. I'm like, this is what we're up against. We're up against people literally yelling that you don't have a voice, that you don't belong here. And April again, and it was weird. She like channeled my mom. She was like, well, if you're gonna be doing this work, you better get used to it. I was like, oh, I'm sitting here trying to like, you know, like cry on his shoulder and like tell me like, I'm like, oh, it was so hard. She's like, no, I don't have time. I'm in law school. And I'm like, well, what the hell, man? And so, and it was funny. So I call up my boy Bobby, who went through the exact same thing on the same day, and I was like, man, April just told me this thing, dude. I was like, this is, and he was like, yeah, his girlfriend, Natasha. He's like, yeah, Natasha just told me the same thing. So I guess we're just over it, yeah? And we're like, yeah, we're done. So we just sort of like, you know, when you're gonna come up against it, it's gonna happen. And the point is, I think you can't internalize that. You can't internalize that sort of, that hatred. You can't internalize that. Like she was saying, you gotta internalize the positive things. For every hateful message, you have the power to sort of internalize the good stuff, and like the people, your family, your friends, the work that you're doing is important. And so I think, you know, that was sort of the one time I slipped in it in adulthood, and I got snapped right back out of it. So, so yeah, that's how. I just internalized the sort of love that I get from around my friends and family, and the support that I have. I'm really lucky to have that support. So.
And I get a ton of hate mail, like so much. And it started very early on with the blog and was very unexpected. Because honestly, I don't think I write about things that are that controversial. I really am careful I'm just demanding that we be, as Native people, be given the respect that we deserve. And so to me, it's so strange that what I write about really hits a nerve with people, and that they feel so compelled to send me these like paragraphs long like rants about what a horrible person I am. And so the interesting thing about the hate mail, though, is that it very, very rarely critiques the actual content of my words and my arguments. It is most often about my identity as a Native person, about me not being Indian enough, whatever that means, or like sexist, misogynistic sort of stuff, or very like racist stuff too. So in addition to getting all of this mail from non-natives, I get a lot of it from natives as well. And that's always really hard, because the main critique, the main critique is that I don't somehow deserve to be a voice on Indigenous issues. And the funny thing is, the only reason people can make that judgment is because I've been very open from the beginning about who I am and where I come from and what what I look like, what my experiences have been growing up. I grew up in suburbia, in like white suburbia in San Diego, and how that's shaped my experiences and the privileges that I have, and how I'm actively working to dismantle those privileges, because that's what you're supposed to do with white privilege. And so people are sending me these critiques on things that I have no control over. So I like can't change where I grew up. I can't change that I didn't grow up with a lot of strong connections. I can't change those things. And so it's really hurtful to hear it reflected back at me. It's like, yeah, I know what I look like, and why is that a problem? And it came to a head last year. My education research got featured on the NPR education blog, which was super exciting, and I was so like stoked to be able to share the amazing work that College Horizons does, which is the organization I work with. And the comments on both Facebook and on the article itself went crazy because there was a thumbnail of my face. And all of the comments were about, like, she's too white to be an Indian. If she can call herself an Indian, then I can too. If she's an Indian, then I'm black. And, like, all this, like, stuff that was just so hurtful and had nothing to do with my research or my theoretical arguments or anything like that. So the way that I deal with it, I mean, I still get really upset by it. I still, like, I mean, I cry when I get some of these emails and stuff, but the way I deal with it is I turn the lens back on it, and I then use it as fodder for my blog. I critique it. I critique the heck out of it. I use all my, like, fancy theory that I've been like throwing down my throat for the last 5 years, then I use it to be like, oh hey, like perfect example of colorblind racism. Oh hey, let's talk about like these things. And for me, it gives me so much power back over it. And so then I can say like, do you realize how like silly this is? And then other people can then chime in and say like, yeah, we agree, that's dumb. And so it helps me move past it. So it's about taking all of this hate and all of this, these things that are really hurtful and being able to turn it into something a little bit more positive and be able to use the skills that I have to take the power back over it. And then on a personal level, if someone every single day is questioning my identity as a Native person, there are kind of two ways I could go. I could either be like, you know what, you're right. Like, I don't deserve to be here. This is not, like, okay, I'm going to back off. This is not it. But instead, I really try to, it's really caused me to think deeply about what is it that makes me a Cherokee woman? What is it that makes me an Indigenous woman? And what are these things that that I've learned and that I need to hold on to, and what do I need to learn more of? And just, it keeps me very humble, but in a good way. I think I, from the beginning, have always said that I don't speak for all Native people and have been very clear with that, but it helps me to be very self-reflective and hold tightly to those things that I know about what makes me an Indigenous person. And I know that I joke sometimes on the blog that I'm the colonizer's worst nightmare, because you could enact everything possible, every assimilating policy, every like cultural genocide, whatever, against my family, like hella stories of relocation and federal policies that just have affected my family's ability to have land and things like that. But I'm still here, and I still identify as an Indigenous person, and that was not supposed to happen. So instead of feeling very vulnerable and upset by this, I instead turn around and be like, you know what? I'm the colonizer's worst nightmare, so come at me. Like, I'm gonna keep going and I'm gonna keep doing this. And because my story is not unique, there are thousands of Native people who share my experience. And so if we're talking about creating counter narratives and counter representations, if I can be the literal face of that in a lot of ways, then I think that's really positive. And I get stories all the time, just like they're talking about. For every like piece of hate, well, maybe not for every, because I get a lot, but I get a lot of amazing feedback. And the relationships that have grown out of this blog, and the opportunities and the people I've met and the stories I hear, especially from Native students, about how they've been able to use the blog as a resource when they're dealing with their own instances of injustice and racism, that is so incredibly powerful to me, and that really outweighs the other parts of it. And again, I'm just like cataloging it all away, and someday, I'll do like the expose of like racist emails I get as a blogger from 2010 to 2015 or whatever it is. But it's not easy, and I do sometimes question all the time, like, why do I continue to do this? But I think the power that I get out of it, and the joy and the positive feedback, is what keeps me going.
Okay, we have a question from the floor. So this is to all of you. What is your opinion of the music video called Alive by Chase and Status? I hope I got that right, who are non-Indian. So the video shows the story of res teens who get involved with drugs, then one goes to get healed the Indian way, but the video shows parts of ceremonies that some consider as an exploitation of Indian culture.
Have you guys seen it?
Yeah. I know one of the guys that was involved in it. Actually, I spoke out against this video. For those that haven't seen it, it's about a young Blackfeet man is like sort of involved in gangs and drugs and stuff, and is like at the end of it all, and then he finds ceremony, and it sort of heals him, and then I think he gets shot at the end.
And then he dies.
And he does. So, for one, just from a storyteller's perspective, nobody's used Deus Ex Machina in a very long time, like as a thing. So anytime that you could just be fixed by God, it bums me out. The other part, just outside of that, is that they're split even on their res. So I know a little bit about, like, I know some of those people that were, like I said, involved, and we talked about it. They're split even on their res, even within the, I think they call it the Crazy Dog Society, the ceremonies that were portrayed. They're split even amongst those guys. They're like, well, I don't know, those guys aren't. I showed this video during a talk that I had at University of Montana, and immediately afterwards, 3 different people came up to me, because my actual opinion on it is that I don't like it. I think it shouldn't, I don't know, it's up to them whether or not, for me, in my personal values, like ceremony shouldn't be shown. There are certain things that I was taught, I was raised, they're a different tribe, they're different people, I don't know how they're, I don't speak for the Blackfeet, I don't speak for the Crazy Dog Society, I don't know. But for me, that bugs me, because it's not my way. But, it's also not my way to, women don't sing on the drum or do certain things, but they do in other tribes. I'm not gonna tell them, don't do that, that's not, So like, sorry, I go around on the point, but, so I talked about this, and I said, I didn't like this video for that reason. It depicted a ceremony that should be sacred, it shouldn't be depicted. And I said, but as I understand it, they had help from the community. There were people that are in it, and they had given their okay, and I'm like, all right, well, who am I to talk to these people? Like, it's their way, it's their stuff. But the actual thing that I had a real problem with was the idea that if you're gonna showcase this kind of story, then the director should have been Native, the cinematographer should have been Native, the people that were doing the story should have been, it shouldn't have been, like, do you guys, so you understand that it was a chase and status video, these 2 guys from the UK, you understand that these guys got something out of it. Do you know the Native people that were involved in this? No, they didn't, they walk away with nothing from this. It's just, that's exploitation. They used these people's stuff and then they walked away and nobody gained anything from it but the non-Native people involved. That was my problem with it. So when I showed this at U of M and I brought these points up, 3 different people came up to me in succession, which was hilarious. One woman said, she came up and she said, that was my son in that video. And, you shouldn't have been talking that way. And we were really happy to be a part of that and stuff. And I remember she quoted me what his day rate was, and it wasn't high. And I was like, your son got seriously scammed in terms of being paid. But then, and so I was like, well, look, that's my opinion. And I was like, that's fine. I appreciate you bringing yours. That's cool. So she walks off. The next person was, hey, that was my nephew in that video. And we really didn't like that. His mom's crazy, and they weren't supposed to show that. The people in Crazy Dog Society weren't really, they weren't a part of that. And, those guys broke off, the ones that did that. And then the next person that came up was like, hey, my cousin was involved in that video, and I didn't like that, blah, blah, blah. And it just went back and forth. Which is what made me realize, God, I have my opinion about, just, the social impacts of this thing. But in terms of in the community, even that was so split, and their opinions were just so varied, I was like, I just didn't really want to touch it anymore after that. But I still have that opinion of, the people that were involved, the Native people, didn't walk away with as much as the non-Native people that were involved in that video, and that bugs me. Anybody else?
No, that sums it up perfectly. That's, yeah, what he said. But I think the one little thing I wanted to add is there is a very real phenomenon in our communities because we're so incredibly invisible and so marginalized in a lot of ways that when these famous fancy people come in and say, we want to put you in a music video, we want to film the Lone Ranger in your community, then there's a lot of rallying around those causes because it's awesome. I mean, you have these mainstream big things in your community, and your community is going to be on the screen and things like that. So there's definitely, because we're so invisible, these opportunities get a lot of traction in our communities because there isn't a lot of other examples of it. And then the piece that Migs brought up too about needing to have a Native director or cinematographer with it, that is my biggest cause with all of this stuff is folks in, Indigenous folks in Australia, I can't remember the exact wording of their phrase, but I always say no representation of us without us. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about a Native-inspired clothing line, if we're talking about a music video, if we're talking about whatever it is, we as Native peoples need to be a part of it, and a big part of it, not just in front of the camera. We need to be the ones making the decisions and offering that perspective and making it something that we are comfortable with and can be proud of as well. So yeah, without that sort of shared collaboration, it does, the lines of exploitation are pretty clear to me. The ceremonial stuff too, yeah, I think Meg's covered it really well, so.
And supporting that stuff. So when our people do make films or design a new fashion line or make art, we have to be or in philanthropy, we have to be a part of supporting their efforts as a community. And it's so important. I see it happen over and over again with my cohort, with my colleagues, with my friends, with my other artist people. You know, like if we want Native people to make Native stuff in any capacity, we have to be financially responsible to them as well. Yeah.
So we have time for one final question.
Oh, no pressure.
Yes.
Who? No, that's you.
It's you, Boo. She asked, did you all hear her? She asked how we feel about Jimmy Fallon's work. Jimmy Fallon. What is his name? Jimmy Fallon. What's his name? Jimmy Nelson. Do Jimmy Fallon if you want. We can talk about that too. Yeah. Jimmy Nelson. Is his last name Nelson?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. You guys have seen the portraits. They're like these, they're beautiful actually. They're portraits of like somebody out in the sub-Sahara desert in like full regalia and the title, it's titled Before They Pass Away. And it went viral. You know, it was showcased in Upworthy and BuzzFeed and the New York Times, and he has an exhibit opening right now in New York City. And, you know, I understand that when he went to take the photographs, he, you know, even though he would go into these quite modern indigenous communities, he would ask them to wear, you know, their traditional regalia and not include contemporary elements. And so I personally feel like every time that a non-Indian comes into an indigenous community and attempts to tell our story and doesn't include how the subject would like to tell their own story, it becomes a form of injustice and continues to perpetuate a stereotype. In my own work, the way that I personally attempt to not be a part of that old narrative is by inviting the subject to tell their own story and represent themselves the way that they would like to be represented. So it's important when I go to a new community, to me, to say what is important, you know, where would you like to have your photograph taken? Sometimes that's on a porch, sometimes that's in a sacred place. I've been to places where people have said, take my photo on the Sundance grounds, and I've been like, oh God, who, you know, the question really becomes, for me, you know, like when do I have the right to tell somebody who they are? And the answer is never. I don't ever have the right to tell somebody else's story without their permission. I don't ever get to take that from them. It belongs to them. And so whether I'm indigenous or non-indigenous, I have to, from a very human perspective, I have to honor that. So I find that because of Jimmy's white privilege or the way that he was brought up, he doesn't know about that traditional way of honoring people. You know, I learned that through the protocol that we experience with our canoe journeys. Before you're allowed to come ashore, you ask permission. And that's what I do. I ask permission before I come ashore, so to speak. So, you know, I personally feel like we're ready to see that change. I think most people are on board with that. When I have this discussion, I find that most people nod their head in agreement. So I don't know how stories like that continue to be told, though. Why the part that really, I just have such a hard time wrapping my mind around why it's so romantic to imagine a people dying. Why is it so newsworthy? Why is it something we want to see? why instead do we not seek the life and the light and the beauty in these cultures and say, let's not let them disappear? Like, it just seems so natural, like the natural order of things. So I don't, it just shocks me to read the headline. And that's all I know. Yeah.
And the answer is because it's not about them. Everybody's heard the term poverty porn at this point, but there's sort of like a weird little offshoot about savior porn. And, with a title like Before They Pass Away, maybe there might be some tribes located, but we know the guy's name that's making this like documentary, that's making this, taking these pictures and doing this stuff. So, really quick, has anybody ever heard of Aaron Huey, Shepherd Ferry? No? They did that, what was the name of not the TED Talk, the series that they did for National Geographic. It was,
Poverty porn?
yeah, it was poverty porn, but they had a title, it was like, Honor the Trees, yeah. So Honor the Trees. So everybody's heard of Aaron Huey and Shepherd Fair and stuff. What was the name of the little girl and the horse, or the boy with the horse? What was the name of the little girl with the feather in her hair? Anyway, so it's not about those people. It's about the photographers. It's about the white people that are there to save these poor little Indians, or save these poor little tribes. And that's why it's fascinating to watch. You're like, oh man, maybe I can make a difference. Yeah, you could if you instead of spending the money to go photograph these people in their poor element. How fascinating would it have been for Aaron Huey to do just set up a series of giant workshops with cameras for these kids and have them take their pictures? What would those pictures have looked like instead of him? That's the interesting question. And so if this person had gone to Before They Pass Away, even with that title, if he had set up some workshops to teach these people these particular cameras and say, hey man, you have carte blanche, we will fund you to tell your stories, show what you want, what would those have looked like, how many more smiles would there have been and stuff, you know what I mean? And so I think that's why when you talk about why is it so fascinating, is because it's not about those people, it's about this sort of savior complex that people get for whatever reason. Anyway.
Yeah, and we've been dealing with this since Edward Curtis. So I got you.
Hey, bingo.
But I was going to say it anyway, so I wasn't. But anyway, but with Edward Curtis, it's true. The Vanishing Indian was or The Vanishing Race was the title of his photographs. And so it's this constant, and then in the early days of salvage anthropology, that's where anthropology really came from, is let's go out and try and document everything about these cultures before they disappear forever. But there's never any sort of discussion of why you might be seeing these cultural shifts and thinking about the systems that you have been a part of that have created that instance. And I think I had one other point besides Edward Curtis. Oh, well, because Edward Curtis was known for manipulating the photographs and for paying people to wear regalia not from their communities and removing actual clocks and things, signs of modernity. And it sounds like Nelson is doing something similar, and there are stories about Aaron Huey asking kids to go play on the piles of garbage, which what child is going to go play on a pile of garbage on their own accord and things. And so there's this erasure of the lens with which the lens with which the photographer is coming at it, and their biases and their stereotypes, and how that plays into what they're putting on the other side of the lens. So they're presented as these ethnographic pieces, as these almost scientific studies of people, but there's so much that goes into the other side of the camera that we're not seeing. So I think they're really dangerous, and I think the disappearing Indian, we've been disappearing for 500 years, and we're still all here, and we're still all native, and so there's a lot of danger in it, just beyond the romanticization of it, in terms of continuing this narrative that we're somehow just on the brink of going away forever.
Right, like the person that's creating that image, instead of saying before they pass away, should instead look unto himself and say, how do we stop this process?
Or what did I did I do to
Participate.
in this system that got us here?
Yeah.
That was actually a great last word. So thank you to our panelists for a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much.
Good job, really good job, really, I'm so proud.
Good job, man. Oh, are we going now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, she throws up a 5-minute sign.